Welcome all again to beautiful Ner Avram and Shari Chesed. So just like last week when we spoke about the Mishkan and we spoke about the difficulty we have relating to all the details of the construction of the Mishkan, we bump into the same thing, perhaps even more so, in Parshas Tetzaveh with the Big Day Kahuna, with the clothes of the Kohanim. Incredible, intricate detail in each of these different garments, and there are some added difficulties here. Number one, just the idea of the difference between Kohanim and others. Maybe we'll get into that more when we get to Parshas Emor when it comes out. But it's important to realize that the honor given to Kohanim is because of what they carry and what they transmit. It's not something personal. I always illustrate it. Imagine that I ended up in a minyan. I'm a Kohen. And I ended up in a minyan with some of the greatest Talmidei Chachamim and Rebbes and Chachamim of the generation, who happened to be Levim. When it comes time for Birkas Kohanim, I would go out and one of them would wash my hands. And they would all stand in front of me when I say the Birkat Kohanim. And then when I walk out of the shul, there's a great crowd because they heard of all these great rabbis who were there. And they're all running towards them to get brachas. No one's coming to me. And I'm like, hey, come to the source. They were just getting from me. So the answer is very different. In other words, the Kohen has, so to speak, not the literal DNA, which people do look into, what they call the Kohen chromosome. Some people like researching it. It doesn't have halachic validity. But there's a spiritual chromosome that enables us to transmit bracha. Okay? And therefore, that's the honor that's given. It's not this idea of a caste system, but it's the honor that comes from that. Now, the clothes of the Kohen are described as being lekavod uletiferet, for honor and for glory. And that seems strange to us as well, right? Would we believe that clothes make the man, right? The fact that you dress up somebody with lots of gold and chelet and argaman and talat shani, that suddenly, right, that makes him more honorable, that's our picture of glory. So obviously there's more to it. It should be clear. First of all, the begodim of the Kohen Hedyot, the regular Kohanim, are also called lekavod uletiferet, also for honor and for glory, and those were the simplest clothes you could imagine. Plain white stuff. That's all it was, right? Plain white garments. Those were also lekavod uletiferet. So again, we're going to have to try to zoom in tonight because our time is short, but when you look in the Mefarshim, you see that the concept of the clothing being lekavod uletiferet means every detail of the clothing corresponded to different midot, to different character attributes within the person. And in fact, Sfarim describe, like the Shari Kedusha of Chaim Vital, that the idea of midos, of character traits, are the clothing of the neshama. Because the neshama exists within us, but it interacts in the world with our different character traits, with our chesed, with our gevura, with all these different things. That's our clothing. So the physical clothing that was designed for the Kohanim, and it's extremely important, they're obligated, they cannot do the avodah without it, and they're punished if they do the avodah without that clothing. It was there to teach the Kohanim about the midos that are supposed to be activated, and actually to activate those midos when they're doing the avodah, especially the Kohen Gadol, on behalf of all Am Yisrael. And this is why we find in the Gemara in Zvachim, Peichev Somet Beis, it goes through a list of which types of averas, which types of transgressions the different Big Day Kahuna would atone for, would be mechaper. It's a whole list, and it's brought down in the Rambam, also in terms of tshuva, all these things. We find, I won't go through the whole list, right? The mitznefes, the hat, is mechaper on gasei aruach, on people who are arrogant. The avnate on improper thoughts, the belt, right? The choshen on miscarriages of justice, the choshen of mishpat. But what we want to focus on tonight is the me'il. Okay? The me'il. Oh, it started acting up?
No, with that.
Oh, sorry. This is Peiches Amud Beis. It's Zvachim. Zvachim Peiches Amud Beis. Last in the parak. So the me'il, which was kulot cheles, was a robe of entire blue. That was the chaper al lashon hara. That came to atone for lashon hara. Okay, now how does a Kohen Gadol wearing something atone for my lashon hara? Right? What is it in there? Now we have to look at the details of the me'il in order to understand how those give the messages that can bring about an atonement for lashon hara. The first, which is pointed out, right, is it says that it had like a place for the head, right, which we describe as the pitachara, is the opening of the me'il, and that was doubled over. Okay, that had to be doubled over, and in order that it should not rip. Okay, correct. Like it's hemmed up, so that's supposed to show that a mouth, you have to keep careful watch over it. You have to keep it closed when it's supposed to be closed. Correct. That was also because the din is inside of the choshen. That there was a Shem Hashem inside of it. Okay. Now the me'il was also very unique because it makes noise. It makes noise. It had little bells on it, which again seems very strange to us. In other words, that doesn't seem very dignified. Right? In the old days, court jesters had like shoes with bells on them or something like that. Why bells? And the Torah says specifically, "V'nishma kolo," that the sound of the coin would be heard. Okay, so they said, "Yavo davar shebekol," let something that makes noise come, and be a kapara, be an atonement for something, for a sin which is done with the voice. So let's try to look. If you just grab me a chumash of any time, Shmos. The final detail on the me'il was what was on the bottom, this idea of the bells. There were pomegranates and bells. Okay, let's read the psukim for a second and see what we're dealing with. Okay, so we made the me'il. Right, and v'haya pirosho betocho safayeh lepiv saviv. Right, that's that opening that we said, which is bent over and hemmed. Maseo re'eh kavitachar yel lo yikareah. It must not be torn. It has to stay closed, which again is where they find that reference to the idea of the mouth. And now vasita al shulav. You make on the shulaim, which means the bottom of the robe. Right, if you imagine you're wearing a bathrobe or something like that. So the very bottom part that's hanging down by your knees, you should put on there rimonei tchelet vargaman, pomegranates of blue wool, purple wool, v'tolad shani, and scarlet wool, al shulav saviv, all around on the bottom hem of this me'il, upa'amei monei zahav b'tocham saviv, and golden bells among them all around. And then the Torah even goes into this detail. Pamon zahav rimon, a gold bell and a pomegranate. Pamon zahav rimon, a gold bell and a pomegranate. Al shulei me'il saviv. On the bottom of this me'il all around, vahi al Aaron l'shares, and this will be on Aaron when he serves. V'nishma kolo b'vo el hakodesh l'fnei Hashem u'v'tzeito v'lo yamut. And his sound will be heard when he comes to the kodesh to serve, and when he leaves, and by wearing this and everything he's supposed to, v'lo yamut, if the Kohen Gadol serves or goes in to where he shouldn't without the begadim, he's chayiv misa. Okay, so there's a big machlokas in the Rishonim, Rashi and Ramban, about the details of these pomegranates and bells. Okay, laying it out briefly, and again, it goes into a huge battle among the Mefarshim, further of the Ramban and Rashi, each one bringing a proof this way and that way for the other, questions for the other. Okay, the way Rashi lays it out is you have alternating. You have these pomegranate-like bells that were made of cloth, pomegranate little round things that were made of cloth, that were hollow, okay? And Rashi says even it was hollow like an egg, okay? It was hollow there, and then interspersed in between each one, you had a golden bell.
Since when is an egg hollow?
Or I'm sorry, meaning entirely closed up there. I was jumping, the Ramban is the one who's talking about the hollowness, okay? So that's the way Rashi lays it out. The Ramban says, based on Psukim here and in Pekudei, says no, that actually these pomegranates contained the bell. the bell was inside this little cloth pomegranate, sticking out a little bit, okay? Because it says, Pamonei zahav b'tocham saviv, inside of the pomegranates, all around. Huh? If it's inside or if it's outside, yeah? And so it goes back and forth. Now, what does this represent? Let's take a look at what these things represent and come to a fascinating Chasam Sofer. First of all, the Baal HaTurim points out, again from the Gemara in Zvachim, that, and Erechin also, Tetzaveh, that there were 72, right, of these bells and pomegranates, which correspond to the 72 forms of nagaim, of tzarat, that can come to a person who speaks Lashon Hara. Okay, again, one of these tie-ins for the connection. Right, so Rashi says the rimonim were agulim v'chalulim, kamo beitzet tarnagolet, like imagining something round, right, with a shell. And the Ramban says, right, the monim were hidden inside these pomegranates and sticking out a little bit. Okay, so now let's see what those opinions would be and how they would have a message for us in terms of Lashon Hara and the kapara for Lashon Hara. So let's look at a fascinating Chasam Sofer, which is actually in Parshas Pekudei. When you're looking at the kelim of the Mishkan and the clothing of the Kohen, you always should look at two different places. Parsha Truma or Tetzaveh, when the command is there to make them. But later on, we go describing how they were made and put together. So the Chasam Sofer says like this. He says, one second. He says, in Pekudei it says, Vayitnu et ha'pamonim betoch harimonim. Okay, there it says almost explicitly that you put the bells inside of these pomegranate-like things. So he says that certainly seems to support the Ramban's opinion that they were inside, and not like Rashi's Perush, that they were interspersed in between. But the next pasuk seems to support Rashi, when it says, Pa'amon v'rimon, Pa'amon v'rimon. So here, the Chasam Sofer goes out on his own, so to speak. It says, Lulei de mistafina. Okay, this is a very important phrase. Lulei de mistafina means, if I weren't afraid, I would say the following. It doesn't mean he's not going to say it, right? But it means, take in mind, I'm a little afraid to say this, because it's something that doesn't have a set source here. He says, I would say, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chaim. Rashi's opinion, Ramban's opinion are both true and correct. How? He says, Haya pa'amon below rimon. There were some bells that weren't in pomegranates. V'achar kach rimon v'pa'amon b'tocho. And afterwards, there was a little pomegranate that had a bell inside. Okay, etc. And so it went around the me'il. Okay, beautiful. Now,
The numbers stack up that way.
huh?
Numbers stack up.
It could. In other words, we don't know exactly how that's 72. You could just have 72, arrange it that way.
You know, it makes sense because if the bell's inside fabric, it's not going to make much noise.
Exactly.
It's going to...
Exactly. Okay, so this is what Zachar is saying is a fascinating thing. That that the bells make noise. Bells wrapped up in something really don't make much noise. Also, the Alshich points out that gold is not a metal used to make bells. I actually spoke to a percussionist today just to get his thoughts on this. Right? It's true because gold is both heavy and soft, so it would not make a loud ring. Bells that we make are usually out of brass, right, and metals like that. Maybe silver bells would tinkle kind of. Gold bells don't make much noise at all. Okay, and we'll see what that represents in a second. So what would this represent, this combination of some bells like this and some bells like that? So it looks like we have some talking and some silencing, muffling, okay? These little woolen mufflers that you put over the bells. So he says like this. He says, since it says in the Gemara that the me'il and these bells were mechaper on Lashon Hara, came to atone for speaking ill of people, nearly lav davka hamadaber ra al chavero. Lashon Hara isn't only when you're actively saying negative things about someone else. He says, Gama medaber tov al atzmo. even a person who's speaking about himself, ringing his own bells, so to speak. Umitpa'er, he's bragging. Kach asiti. Look how I did so many wonderful ma'asim tovim. He says, Hainu mamash k'mo lashon hara al chavero. That is like, so to speak, almost a silent lashon hara that's coming from his noise about his friend, because it's like a diuk, right? You know, I come to shul early. I do this. I clean up everything in shul. Implication, the other people don't. Okay, so this is what they call the silent killer, right? This is that implied lashon hara which is there. So there's the ringing of the bell, but there's also the silent message. He says, Milanu gadol min Nehemiah. Nehemiah was punished, it says in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, for mentioning, it says, Zachrei Elokim l'tova, Hashem, remember me for the good, what I did. And that's viewed as not a good thing. Umikol shekeni she'enu mitkaven elo rak litpa'er. There Nehemiah was trying to get Hashem to answer his tefillah, and he was mentioning something he did. But if you're just bragging, right, for the adulation of the crowd, so certainly that is something which is negative. The bells that ring, they're mechaper on your garden variety lashon hara. The one that we all know, right, where you're saying bad stuff about people. But, he says, the pamonim, ima rimonim and the pamonim b'tocham, mechaprim al mele'ei mitzvot karimon, umashrim kol v'chutzot. Okay, now, let's think about a pomegranate a second. Years ago, I heard a series of shiurim from Moshe Shapiro Zatzal where he explained how all of the Shivas Haminim, all of the 7 species of Eretz Yisrael, really correspond to one of the 7 midot: Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yisod, Malchut. Right? Because some of those minim, if we look at them, don't seem that exciting. Right? Like barley, yeshiva guys like it because it's the basic ingredient of both beer and chont. But otherwise, but each one represents one of these midos. Now, another symbol of the pomegranate that Chazal use is a pomegranate is packed full of seeds. It's packed full of seeds. So they say that even the Rishayim of Am Yisrael, even the wicked of Am Yisrael, are meleim mitzvos karimon, are full of mitzvahs like a pomegranate. Just, that's not our topic, but how do you explain that? So the Ben Ish Chai, he explains that because every Jew, even if he does one good thing, that one good thing multiplies. It leads to other good things. It creates ripples and waves, and it has descendants. And the next thing you know, he's full of mitzvahs that he brought into the world with that one good thing that he did. But as a total, the pomegranate represents a person who's full of mitzvahs. So he says a person like that has to muffle his bell. Okay, that person, you gotta put a lid on it. Okay, if you're going to start ringing your bell about how good you are, how great you are, that is able to cause a lot of damage. So that's a fascinating, beautiful parish from the Chasam Sofer, reconciling the two shitas and bringing what the message is. Let's look at some other ways in which speaking, even in a positive way, can cause damage. Okay, because a person sometimes you have on your radar don't want to say lashon hara, don't want to say lashon hara. But here, we brought one example, a person simply letting everyone know how many wonderful things he does. And the Chasam Sofer says that can be very damaging. That can bring about a lashon hara type of result. So the Sefer the Shevet Musar, he was one of the Gedolim in Turkey a couple centuries ago. He warns people, married people, he says, never praise your spouse to another married person. Okay? This is a big one. Right, a person, a woman's talking to another married woman. My husband is such a sweetie. Every morning he gets up early. He makes me coffee. He brings it to the bed, and then he goes and he makes breakfast to me. And meanwhile, you see this cloud of steam on the other woman's head. Like, he's never done anything like that for me. Right? He says that can be very dangerous. You have to think ahead. Even when you're saying positive things, think of the repercussions. Think of how it would be heard. Similarly, I saw that Chassan once came to Reb Aaron of Belz, previous Belzer Rebbe, and he gave him very surprising advice. He asked for some advice before his marriage. He said, I'm going to give you advice for the future. Never praise your child in front of other people who have children. He said it could border on retzach, on murder. Right? One person, he's full of joy over the greatness of his child, what he did in school. My kid, he just made a siyum on Shas, and he's been running this chesed program, and meanwhile there's some guy there, his kid just got thrown out of his third yeshiva, right, and all these kind of things, and you don't know what to do, and it can bring about terrible destruction to the person and to the kid in terms of these things. So this is a classic idea of where you have to put that bell in a muffler, even if it's classically defined as positive. Chavetz Chaim brings other examples. He says, don't praise someone in matters of money, let's say, to their wife or to their business partner. Right? You're over in your friend's house, you tell his wife, your husband is such a tzaddik. Every time I'm stuck for money, he lends it to me. He's never asked for a penny back. And she's thinking, like, I haven't had money to pay the bills, and all these kind of things. You got a business partner also, he's the greatest. He lets me have on credit all the time. When I come to the shop, he gives me some free merchandise. Think, right? Think about what the repercussions might be. This is the idea of the control. And this is what the Alshich Hakdosh, Moshe Alshich, the great Makubal from Tzvat, learns from these combinations. He says, why does it say that you have rimonim upa'amonei zahav betocham? Why does it say that you have, right, rimonim, the little pomegranates, and among them golden bells? If they're alternating, let's say, according to Rashi's Perush, so the golden bell, the pomegranates are also in between the golden bells. If it's like the pasuk says, pomegranate bell, pomegranate bell, pomegranate bell. So it's true. Each bell is in between two pomegranates, but each pomegranate's in between two bells. So he explains, right, that the rimon represents being quiet. Again, because it's a fruit that's closed. Okay, he says, especially the way Rashi explains it, that it's closed up like an egg. He says it's giving you the percentages of how you should speak. Chazal speak about the power of silence. It's interesting, as a professor, I forget his name, he teaches music composition at Bar Ilan. He's an Amshinover Chassid, fascinating guy. And someone asked him, he produces like modern classical music, which is kind of hard to hum, what comes out there now. And he told someone that he's really been doing a lot of work with silence, that silence is a very important part of these symphonies that he's doing. Okay, so silence can say something. Silence is important. Chazal say, in the guf tov mishtika. Being quiet is good. So therefore, he says, in your proportions of talking, don't think it's 2 parts bell ringing and 1 part quiet. The Torah wants you to realize 2 rimonim, 2 quiets for 1 talking. Okay, 2-to-1 ratio. Racham Stifka Rebbe, one of the previous Racham Stifka Rebbe's, had a beautiful way of phrasing it based on the simonim of the Pesach Seder. He said, karpas, right, that thing that we eat, the vegetable that we eat, is Roshei Tevos. It spells out, Klal Rishon Pes Sagur. The first rule is, keep your mouth quiet. Then it goes, Yachatz Magid, if you are going to say something, only say half of it. Right? Meaning, it's a good thing to keep it under control, right, to have a limit on this. So now the Alshich says, what this teaches us also, and it's just fascinating, if you look, the Alshich has pages and pages on this idea of the pomegranates and the bells and the me'il, where he speaks about all the different types of speaking, positive and negative, which are there. Another aspect of the silence, he says, is shmirat sod, is to protect secrets. He said, not only secrets that other people have entrusted to you, even your own secrets. Meaning, if you spill out everything, that's also going to lead into Lashon Hara and into all these things. Now let's finish with a couple interesting positive twists. The Chasam Sofer went on in his piece, and he says, but you know what? There is one time in which I recommend the person bragging. He says, if you give tzedakah. There's a pasuk in Tehillim, Kuf Yud Beis, Pizar Natan Levyonim Tzidkato Medetlad. A person like spread out and gave to the poor, his tzedakah remains forever. He says, what does this mean? He says, this means that giving tzedakah is praiseworthy even for a person that glorifies himself with it. Right? He says, if Chazal say you're allowed to test HaKadosh Baruch Hu with tzedakah, the one time you're allowed to test, they learn it from Meiser, right? B'chanuni na bezos, Hashem says, test me, right? And I will give you, he says, so certainly here, a person is able to brag. Now we're going to see why in a second. right? Pizar, he says, is Rashi Tevos, Pa'amon Zahav Rimon. Pa'amon Zahav Rimon. He says, learn this idea over here, meaning you can make the noise of the bells in this case when you give to the poor people, Tzidkaso Omer Salad. Why? Because it brings more tzedakah to the poor people. The Chasam Sofer said in another place, like there's a question sometime, they do what's called appeals in shul, fundraising and such. And sometimes a person wants to give anonymously. And he seems to have the source. The Rambam says the best way of giving tzedakah is when you don't even know who you're giving to. Person getting it doesn't know who it's coming from. And that would be the best. But the Chasam Sofer says if it's going to create a bidding war, and if it's going to put pressure on other people to give more because you gave, and the poor people are going to benefit in the end, do it. You have to give up on your own, right, spiritual pinuk, what you call spoiling yourself, in order for them to get more. And there's a similar story about this, about the Brisker Rav Soloveitchik, that's very instructive. We got Ma'ariv. We'll finish with this. When he came to Eretz Yisrael, so he arrived, he got off the ship, and he didn't kiss the ground. So someone who came to meet him said, Rebbe, right, it's brought down from the Gemara, the Rambam says that the great tzaddikim would kiss the ground of Eretz Yisrael, menashkin kipei da'ako, they would kiss the rocks of Akko. Why didn't you do it? He says, because it says the great tzaddikim do that. Okay, you see how different he is from us? We see something in a book, great tzaddikim do this, we run to do it. He sees the great tzaddikim do this, he says, okay, so that's not me. So this person, though, didn't let go. He says, okay, but it also says, great tzaddikim give tzedakah before davening in the morning, and you do that. Why do you do that if you don't think you're such a great tzaddik? He says, because the poor person gets money. He says, right? He says, if I'm a tzaddik or I'm a not tzaddik, bottom line, he gets it. Okay, so this is something that we have to do. I'll just give you a Mari Mokum, so we don't have time. Rav Hirsch says that the idea of the me'il, of the bells, the pomegranates, is to avoid our tendency to judge others and look down on them, which leads us to Lashon Hara. Okay, and it's expressed by the fact that there's a variety of people in Am Yisrael. The multicolored pomegranates represent the idea that there are different people with their weaknesses, with their positives and negatives, and all these things make us who we are. And you have to celebrate all types of people. And the final thing that fills that in is that the Sfas Emes, not on the Torah, but in his Chidushim on Zvachim, says, he has a way of reading Psukim, it seems to him that there may have been 3 different colored pomegranates. Not that they were all woven together from those 3 colors. You would have a purple one, you would have a red one, you would have a blue one. Again, when you combine that with Rav Hirsch, celebrating the fact that even if people are different than you, don't put them down. Realize that everyone has something to contribute, and that's the way we defeat Lashon Hara with the pomegranates and bells.